The Renaissance, named after the French word rebirth, was a period in Europe between the 14th and 17th centuries marked by a surge of interest in the production of art and literature. From this period of rebirth came the desire to understand life through careful observation and to successfully recreate three-dimensional physical reality on two-dimensional surfaces. Because many Renaissance artists revered the human form as the physical representation of independence, expression, and potential, it was of utmost concern for these artists to portray the figure with faithful accuracy. To do this, Renaissance artists often studied anatomical dissections to thoroughly understand each component of the body. However, even after perfecting the human figure through this method, one issue remained. How would artists craft an equally convincing physical space behind and around the human form in order to complete their drawing or painting? Many early Renaissance artists, such as Italian painter Giotto di Bondone, struggled with perspective and failed to create a convincing illusion of receding space. In his painting, Christ Before the Caiaphas, the figures seem fairly accurate in their portrayals, but the space around them is confusing and disjointed. Notice the strangely placed window on the far left wall, or the awkward tilts of the steps in the foreground. Giotto is one of many Renaissance artists who understood the human anatomy, but could not quite perfect spatial accuracy. Luckily, in 1420, Filippo Brunelleschi developed a solution that would change the ways in which artists depict space forever. Brunelleschi was an Italian designer and architect during the Renaissance period in Florence. His studies focused heavily on math and geometry, leading him to the development of a geometry-dependent method of depicting space known as linear perspective. Linear perspective abides by two principles. Objects appear smaller as their distance from the observer increases, and objects are subject to foreshortening. Foreshortening implies that an object's dimensions along the line of sight appear shorter than its dimensions across the line of sight. It seems that Brunelleschi initially developed linear perspective for architectural purposes. In 1434, Brunelleschi had plans to build the Church of Santo Spirito in Florence. In order to show his clients how the church would look once built, he produced a perspective drawing that detailed the main body of the structure. When comparing the drawing to an actual photo of the church, it is clear how effective the new technique of mathematical perspective was in depicting spatial reality. However, linear perspective was not only applicable to architectural sketches. In fact, many Renaissance artists began using this technique in their work to develop a convincing sense of space. For instance, in Masaccio's fresco painting titled Holy Trinity, the use of Brunelleschi's mathematical perspective is evident. The complex, curved ceiling recedes naturally into space, and it is easy to assess the distance between the observer and each figure. To understand linear perspective, one must first be acquainted with certain terminology. Most examples of linear perspective consist of a horizon line, a vanishing point, and orthogonals or parallel lines. The horizon line can be defined as a horizontal line drawn across the picture that sets the height of the viewer's eye. The vanishing point is a point on the horizon line where receding parallel lines viewed in perspective appear to converge. Lastly, orthogonals are described as lines that connect to the vanishing point to portray an object receding into space. There are two main types of linear perspective: one-point perspective and two-point perspective. One-point perspective uses a single vanishing point to create an illusion of depth. Begin by creating a horizontal line, and then place the vanishing point anywhere on the line. Then, draw the closest side of any geometric object and connect its corners to the vanishing point. Be sure to end the object before it reaches the vanishing point. Lastly, erase any excess lines. One-point perspective is the most simplistic form of linear perspective and will often yield elementary results. However, it is essential that one understands one-point perspective before creating artwork that utilizes two-point perspective. Two-point perspective is a similar but slightly more complicated adaptation of one-point perspective. Two-point perspective is often used when viewing an object from its edge rather than its side. To begin a two-point perspective drawing, create a horizon line with two vanishing points. Then, create a single vertical line anywhere on the page. Connect the endpoints of this line to each of the vanishing points. Then, draw vertical lines that signal the end of the object. Finally, connect the endpoints of these new lines to the vanishing point and erase any excess lines. Two-point perspective is often more dynamic than one-point perspective. Although this practice was first instituted nearly 600 years ago, linear perspective is still extremely relevant today. Next time you're making a drawing depicting space and depth, you should remember Brunelleschi and his genius invention from the early Renaissance era.